So welcome back to the podcast. My name is Joseph Clough and this is episode 817. And today we're going into Stoicism. We're going to be more stoic in life. Now, some people don't know what that really means, so let's kind of break that down in a way that gives us the foundation. It gives us the foundation as to what we're going to learn. So Stoicism is about even going through hardships, being able to tolerate that hardship, and also be able to see that hardship in a different perspective that once you do, changes your relationship and therefore your thoughts and your feelings to it. Now, I've noticed, and by the way, in this episode, I'm going to go through a series of questions. These questions are to get you to think differently, to give you a different perspective. Now, it can be in a specific context, like a certain situation, but a lot of these questions are also going to be for your whole life, So it's going to be fun, it's going to be insightful. But if we go into then, why is this important? Because we know what it is really, how we change our perspective, but why do I want to be speaking about this today, and why should you be listening and answering these questions? Well, if we think of what most of my audience experiences, it's going to be the anxiety, the worries, the self-doubt, the lack of confidence, the dread, the procrastination, the self-sabotage, which means we are seeing the world from that reactive state, right? We're reacting in a negative, associated state. Well, if we want to see the world differently, we've got to see it through a different lens, not the present lens, because the lens of anxiety, the lens or the glasses of self-doubt is not producing the good results that you want. It might have a good intention, trying to protect you from all the things which could happen, but it's not really fulfilling the outcome of true protection. So we've got to be able to change that perception by looking for a different filter. And how do we change our filter or our perception or our perspective or our frame of reference? Well, one of the good ways, and here's what I do with my clients, is not saying you're wrong, right? Not going, well, of course you're good enough. Of course you're a great person, because that person's going to go, well, I don't believe it though. I don't believe it. You might see that in me, Joseph, but I don't believe it. So no matter what evidence I bring up and say, look on paper how amazing you are, my clients won't believe it because it's part of the issue. So how do we get around that? Well, I like to think, because I've invested so much time into this, is asking questions. And I've noticed that the more questions that we have, which generates an alternative narrative or perception, causes us to shift our identity to what a problem is. Now, these questions I have for you today are not my questions, but this is being broadcasted live on YouTube. And before we got to this segment, the recording of the show, I was saying that I've been thinking like this for so long that it's become natural to my being to do this. No matter what problem occurs, no matter what challenge arises, I've trained myself consciously to then hand it over to my unconscious mind. So that means I'm always looking for better solutions, or what I would call is a reframe of my perception. So once again, although these aren't my questions, these are the kind of questions which I ask myself unconsciously now. It just happens and it reframes it naturally. So Stoicism has been around really, really long time. Like, you could go all the way back to Marcus Aurelius. I can never say his name. Aurelius. I said it perfectly to myself in my mind. But look, let's put it this way. You know the movie Gladiator? Marcus Aurelius, I think. There we go. Don't think about it, just say it. He was in that in the beginning. He was like the father. Not necessarily true in that story, but that's the past and that time, a period of time of like the Romans and things like that. And despite having all this amazing, immense power and wealth, he still became very philosophic, right? Some people go to power and do all these things and take, but it caused him to have that self-reflection to look for more meanings. So that's where it really comes from, that kind of era, maybe a bit before that or not. I don't know too much about the history. So now you know what it is, why it's important. Well, now let's get to the application of it. So the first question, oh, by the way, I said, where did I get these questions from? Because I want to always give credit, and you can look more into him. And it's, I think it's Ryan Holiday or Halliday. I think it's spelled Holiday though. And really good YouTube channel, podcast and stuff. I've heard lots of his interviews over the years. So just to give credit where it's due. Let's start with one of the questions. And that question is this in my control? Is this in my control? You see, sometimes we want to be over controlling. Especially if we're anxious, we're trying to prepare for everything. When you recognize, well, what am I in control of and what am I not in control of, it allows us just to breathe for a moment. I mean, how can I really get crazy anxious if I think that, well, I'm not a part of that situation. I don't have control over that. And one of the examples could be like the weather. I cannot control the weather. I cannot control the economic situation. I cannot control all these external things. But if I live my life as if I have to try to control it, I'm always going to feel defeated because it is out of my control. But if I recognize what I'm out of control of, it then causes me to go, well, what am I in control of? And that can be many, many things. I'm in control of my time, the time I put into working with my own unconscious mind, the time that I speak to my family. I'm in control of ultimately my thoughts. I know that we feel like the anxiety runs us, but ultimately that is a myth. Although it feels like that, you can get back in the control. So ask yourself, when we go through life and through challenges, you go, well, is this in my control? And what am I in control of? That causes me to kind of get a deeper reflection, a deeper understanding, the separation almost, rather being so immersed in the anxiety, so immersed in all the potentialities of what could go wrong. I realize it's not too much of a big issue. And I'm saying this playfully because I know a lot of people are, well, it is a big issue. Well, once you start to get into this and ask this question consistently, you'll notice the reduction of anxiety because you're seeing it through that different lens. One thing you can always do as a side question is even consider, what is the worst case scenario of this? Like, what is the worst case? And ultimately, you'll get to the point where the worst case is either so big it doesn't matter, like it just doesn't matter, like we move on from this world, so we're out of control, so we might as well do what we have to do. Or sometimes we realize that the worst case is never the worst thing in terms of it doesn't feel as bad because we paint these illusions in our mind and exaggerate. But in reality, I mean, think about it this way. Have you ever gone through a situation where you absolutely dreaded it, but in the end it was okay? Well, a lot of the time that can be the case. Not for everything, like we have panic attacks and things like that, but having that perspective of being at peace with the worst case, it kind of gives you a realization that actually it's not so bad. And I was actually talking to my trainer today, and when I was talking about this with him, he said, yeah, it's a bit like fighters, because he's like works out, he's interested in like the whole MMA thing. And sometimes it's good to be at peace that you might get knocked out in front of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or even millions of people. Like, to be at peace, that happens. Otherwise, you may be too confident that you make a mistake, so you become complacent, or just to be at peace that it may happen, it takes away a lot of the fear, rather like the expectation of it happening. So sometimes just being at peace with those worst case scenarios allows, once again, the reduction of anxiety. The other thing to consider as a whole is, who are you spending time with? Who are you really spending time with throughout your day, throughout your week, throughout your month? We kind of said this a little bit on the pre-show, because one had a great question about like people who we cannot let go of, and some people we can let go of. I was saying I'm an advocate of letting go of toxic people. I don't feel the obligation to keep them in my life, especially if it's harming my physiology, my mental and physical well-being. Sometimes we have to remove ourselves from the circumstance. And it's good to reflect on that. I mean, they say you are the sum of the 5 closest you spend time with. And if you just kind of make a list in your mind, who do you spend the most time with? You might recognize, oh my goodness, there's 2 people there who are narcissistic, always belittling me, always like when you think about them, you know it's like self-interest and trying to make us feel bad. Well, if you hang around with those people, you absorb that, and that becomes your perception, because you go, well, yeah, maybe I'm not enough. You know, that gaslighting causes you to believe that to be true, although you're just being gaslit, right? Those narcissists, they can do that. So you've got to take reflection in who you're spending time with. What kinds of people in your life? One thing that I made a decision about a few years ago was, although I work with like so many different kinds of people and their issues, so I'm dealing with a lot of energies, in other words. Like, we get a lot of people, whether it be in the program or whether it be like from the emails and all those things, comments, live streams. I want to be in my best positive state. So even though that's the case, I still know that I am okay. Like, I know that I'm surrounded with the right people still. I tend to attract some amazing people. Yeah, we have issues. So it's not like, well, just because I have an issue, we have to let them go. But I also know that all relationships, in my opinion, the number one benchmark for intimate to friendships, even to family, in my opinion, the fundamental foundation should be about lifting each other up. That's what I think it is. If you feel like they're pulling you down, and think about just the nature of the position of pulling someone down, they are below you. So not to say that they're below you, that you don't want to associate in that like egotistical way, but they're trying to pull you down because they're not happy themselves. They're dealing with their own stuff. Now, sometimes they've got to make that realization. Sometimes you leaving causes an epiphany for them. Sometimes they'll keep it, but it doesn't have to be yours. We take so much responsibility sometimes, and as if we've got to help someone. And so part of the people pleaser kind of syndrome of the imposter syndrome and the anxiety that we've got to please everyone's needs to get some external validation. Well, in reality, that is not the case. In reality, you do not have to take ownership over everyone. So ask yourself that question. Who are you spending time with? And if you put your hand, there's what I do about decisions as well. I put my hand on my heart and I notice, do I feel a pull towards going forward? Or if I feel like there's a bit of resistance in going backwards. And maybe it's high or low for you as well. Like, because I said about lifting up and pulling down. But I get in touch with my neurology. My unconscious mind knows. It's the intuition part of us. It's picking up all the information that I'm not aware consciously. I'm only aware of certain small pieces of information. They usually say 7 plus or minus 2 pieces. That's why even telephone numbers, we have to break them down to smaller digits. Or if you're going getting directions for someone, if they say over 7 things, you're like, I cannot remember where I'm going anymore. So I want to get in touch with the greater perspective, which is my unconscious mind, my physiology, the somaticness of me, and just notice, do I feel there's a good positive forward, or if there's a bit of resistance in going back? And in reality, you should know, ultimately, by having this conversation with one another right now, if they're lifting you up. But as I said, who are you spending time with? And remember, although not technically true, but it's a good little benchmark, is you are the sum. Let's just say you are the sum of the closest people you hang around with. It doesn't have to be 5. It could be less, could be more. But you are the sum of who you choose to spend time with. That could be a nice little wake-up call. The other thing, another question to think about is, what is your ideal day? What is your ideal day? Now, that can be many different things. But in reality, are we living the ideal day? Are we doing things that lift us up, just like people? In our day, are we surrounding? So it's a bit of an add-on question. But if we're just living a life of obligation to things that we dislike, and there is going to be a difference here. Like, some people say, like, find your passion and you'll be perfect. It doesn't have to be the case. Because some people are like, I don't know my purpose or passion. You just got to find something you're passionate about. Like, so you could be doing, you'll say, 9 to 5. But if you're not just so zonked out and tired and stressed that you can't do things, and yeah, maybe there might be an issue. But sometimes you do a 9 to 5, but then at the weekend or the evening, you do things that light your neurology up, that lift you up. You get to choose. That's going to be a theme here. You get to choose. So remember, what does your ideal day look like? And what is it presently like? And what can you do to start implementing the ideal into the present? There's always a way. I would honestly say to you, coming from a place of being vulnerable here, I struggle with that sometimes because I love what I do. And people think that I could be a workaholic at times or like spending too much time, but I genuinely love it, right? So if I think of my ideal day, it could even be on my birthday. I might be going, well, I want to go live or on YouTube, or I want to check on my emails, or I want to do something. Like, that to me is not a negative. So I've got to reframe myself of what society thinks I should do. Like, if you want to work every single day and it lifts you up and you are energized because of it and you're making an impact in your life or even others, then is it really work? Is it really a negative thing, even if people say it? Once again, you get to choose. You get to choose. The other aspect as a question is about, are we trying to be something in other people's eyes, right? I'm going to guess yes. Because a lot of the time, it's like the keeping up with the Joneses. Like, you need the big car, you need the next house, you need to have that clothing, or have a certain, I call it like a comparison conflict. We're comparing ourselves to others, where really, in my opinion, you should compare yourself to yourself from where you were a week ago, from a year ago, from 10 years ago. That's the best benchmark, once again, in comparison. It shouldn't be about other people. Admire them, model them, or choose not to. But if you compare yourself to where you are from where you were, that's the best level of comparison. But be conscious of those goals and dreams that you have. Are they even yours? When we're thinking about having to buy certain things or need that extra promotion, sometimes you don't. Sometimes there's things that you want and you get there and it didn't live up to what you thought it was because it was expected upon you. Once again, a lot of people I work with have these high expectations for themselves because maybe their parents had high expectations for them growing up, but they were never good enough, never perfect. So therefore they tried to aspire to gain validation through the being a certain way, not their true self, rather the doing of what is right for you. You get to choose once again. These are questions you get to ask yourself. Am I just being what someone wants me to be in society, in a relationship, in a family unit, through colleagues or friends? That can be a tricky one sometimes. We kind of fall into the trap of that comparison to our friends and colleagues. But is it really true? Like, is there another way of thinking about this? Can I just do what I want to do without the expectation of others? Now, the other one I've got here is, if I am not me, who is? And if I'm only for me, who am I? That's a real tricky question, and it's gonna get your mind spinning. So I'm gonna say it again. If I am not for me, if I'm not for me, who is? Because I made a mistake on the first part when I first said it. So if I'm not for me, who is? If I'm only for me, who am I? Let that kind of resonate a little bit. Because there's sometimes we are, once again, if we're not looking for ourselves, sometimes other people aren't. They're not lifting us up. But sometimes we've got to go, well, who am I really? Like, who do I want to become? Who am I kind of cheering on for myself? Am I my biggest advocate and supporter of myself? Because if we're not our biggest advocate to happiness, to our own future self, we're going to get in some issues along the way. We're going to start to be an advocate for the problem. We're going to start to be an advocate for what other people think. Once again, buying into people's expectations and their opinions. And look, there's so many opinions in the world right now, more than ever. And some people just buy into other people's opinions because it's just the opinion of many people. I don't believe in that. I don't think that has to be a true. We can have different opinions. We don't have to agree, we can respect, for that is your opinion, but it doesn't have to be my opinion. And that's okay either way. So I want to make sure that I'm being an advocate for myself. I want to make sure, who do I really want to be in the world? Another question we can ask ourselves is, what am I missing by choosing to worry or be afraid? What am I missing by choosing? That puts the responsibility on ourselves, but I'm not from meanness. It does not negate what bad people did to you in the past, but it's the ability to understand that we have that choice again, that we get to choose to think, feel, act, and react. So what am I missing? And that could be missing out in life, missing out on opportunities, missing out on peace and happiness, self-love, relationships, health, career, money, and abundance, by choosing to worry or be afraid. And the reason why I like that is because if I think about what I'm missing out for, I'm finding the reasons to change. See, even in my program, I do something very, very similar. I get people to write down 100 reasons as to why they should change. And then suddenly they have leverage. Suddenly they go, oh my goodness, I'm not in no man's land of I should just be happier or I should get that promotion. Now I'm like, how can I not change? So think about, what are you missing by choosing to worry or be afraid? And that leads to a question of, are you doing your job? Are you doing your job in living a meaningful life? That's like looking in the mirror and going, am I really doing the work? Am I really paying attention to what I'm really doing? Am I dismissing? Am I blaming? Am I coming up with all those negative consequences? Or am I going to do something else and start to do the work? I always when I speak to people, go like, are you all in? All in for your happiness, all in for the abundance, all in for yourself. Because if you're not, it means you're committed, and I don't mean this in a mean way, but if you're not committed to doing the work and doing your job in life and being happy, you are more committed to staying the same. That is one for me, by the way. Like, that rocks me sometimes. Like, if I am not committed in getting up in the morning or working out in the day, if I'm not committed to helping people, if I'm not committed to doing my own personal work, if I'm not committed in investing in myself, I'm committed in just really staying the same. And that's for me. But I want you to consider that. Are you going to start to go, actually, it's time for me to do some work? I might have some resistance unconsciously. And as a whole, society, the world, operates and decides based on fear. Now, we could bring that back to the R brain, the first brain, which is the reptilian brain of us, which is very territorial, protective, fight, flight. And also, if we think about biology, we didn't have all the security that we have in this day and age in, like, the, say, first world or even maybe second world. Way back, we had to be aware of so many consequences. Like, we don't know how good we've got it living today. We might see more violence because we see it to be seen on social media. But way back then, you would not want to be just walking around at night. And I'm sure a lot of us don't mind walking out at night sometimes, right? We are living in a relatively safe place compared to how we used to be. So there is that part that most people make decisions based on fear. But I always say, in times of change, you have to decide on what is right. So are you doing your job? And what is the most important thing about doing your job? Like, and by job, I'm not saying like a physical career and job. It could be, but I'm saying your job as a being, like as a living a meaningful life. You got to think about what's the most important thing about that. That's going to give us more reasons, right? It's so important. Here's a couple. And it could be for other people too. Shouldn't just be, but I'm going to let go of my low self-esteem for my children, because I don't want to pass down, which was passed down to me. I mean, if I had children, because I don't, if I had children and I had an issue of still like not being good enough, I will be petrified of passing that down and then them passing it down. I don't know sometimes how many generations we are operating as a software, right? So if you think of like phones and devices and computers, they're always being like, the software gets updated, whereas every year, some people every month, all those things. Well, sometimes our software has been passed down to us still using like the 1960s software or the 1920s software or the 1800s software. And it's up to us to start to realize, I'm not going to do that. So sometimes the most important thing can be for other people, right? And some people might even say, by the way, that, oh, I say all the good and great things to my children. They never see me being anxious or feeling like an imposter. That is absolutely wrong. You see, 7% of communication is words. The other 93% is our tonality and it's our physiology. You can say all the right words, but your unconscious mind is like a lighthouse shining up all your fears, worries, and doubts. That is true. That is just our biology. So that could be something as to why I want to change, because I don't want to pass down the same things which were given down to me, whether it be biological or whether it be just through lessons. Like by me being an example of someone not being good enough, my child between 0 and 7 is being imprinted based on sociology to assume that level of identity sometimes. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. The next 7 years in sociology is the modeling. So when you think about it now, who are we going to model most as children? Those that we are hanging around with. The sum of who you hang around with. Who's that most likely to be between 0 and 14? Well, it's going to probably be the parents, right? That's probably going to be spending a lot of their time. Yes, it's going to be school. Yes, it's going to be friends. But we've got to take in consideration that our children are being imprinted and they're modeling us all the time. How do you think they learn to walk? They saw you and then try to reproduce it, right? So that could be one of the reasons, but it could be other things. It could be making impact in the world, being an example of what can be done, being passionate, purposeful, finding meaning in the things that you love and you enjoy, giving yourself the permission to do that. What is the most important thing? If you go ahead and I'm going to go to another one which just came to me in a second as a question, so remember that. But the most important thing is just doing something that you enjoy. I mean, where it be the consequence of not changing or the consequences of changing. Now, the other thing I was just thinking is, like, if you have a problem right now, it just popped into my mind, and I zoomed out from the perception of the whole globe, right? The whole world. I'm out in space, and I'm now thinking as that perception, how big is my issue really? Not so big when I think of the grand scheme of things. Now I could go way off, not just 10 years into the future. It could be centuries in the future, thousands of years in the future. How important is my problem I'm having right now? Not really. And we could go all the way back in time. Like, maybe I've got it pretty good in comparison once again of what people went through way back then. So you can start to change the meaning by changing the lens once again. So that just kind of popped into my mind. One thing to ask yourself, does this actually really matter? Does this actually really matter? In the long term, in the short term? Like, when I think of a problem, is it really mine? Is it mine or someone else's? Does it really matter? Am I investing too much time and energy on something so inconsequential? But I just made it. I've deleted and distorted and generalized. You don't always realize that we are huge distortion creatures. We distort everything. We delete so much information. We generalize so much. You, for example, could have a most beautiful, perfect day. Then one thing happens, like you spill wine on yourself or a drink on yourself, and you might go, well, my whole day was bad. It was horrible. Well, if that's the case, you just totally deleted all the good things and generalized this one small experience into the everything, right? So we've got to get that perspective. Does this really matter? Is this the end of the world? Is it really important? Are there more important things I could be focusing on? Another question would be things like, is this a lifetime or dead time? Like, is it adding value to me growing, having a meaningful life, or is it I'm just sedating myself? Am I really just sedating myself by watching Netflix like a zombie? Or just scrolling on my phone like a zombie, just over and 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 over again? To me, that was most likely dead time. It's not a live time. Like right now, me doing this live podcast is a lifetime. It lifts me up. I love just speaking about these things and articulating it for myself. Because everything I've learned over the last 22, 23 years is the investment into knowledge to be able to help my life to then hopefully be able to say it in a way that resonates. So I love doing this. Like, it lifts me up. It lights up my neurology. I get to hang out with people when I do these. It's one of those things which really brings me a lot of love into my life. So I want to make sure that I'm being the most productive in a lifetime, doing the work for myself, whether it be getting out there in the world or even the things I dislike to a degree, because there's going to be some times of business I'm not always going to enjoy it, but it's business. You got to do it. You got to be able to help. You got to invest money to help more people. It's not all organic that everyone's going to give you word of mouth. We talked about in the last episode, like we don't get many reviews on the app despite it being downloaded, or the audio is getting 180,000 downloads every single month. We probably get less than 5 or 10 reviews a month, sometimes just 2. So I've got to put a lot of time and effort in getting my work out there to hopefully support people who really, really need it. So Just consider like what is lifting up time or alive time and what is sedation time when it comes to your experience. And then finally, one question. And there's a question that you get to choose once again. And it's not given to you. You get to design this. You get to choose. And that is the big question of what is the meaning of life. Well, to me, ever since I made this change myself, I get to choose. So what is the meaning of life is to find, for me personally, to find meaning from life. And it's said that like the life will throw you certain events to kind of lead you in the direction. I like to think that resistance and conflict is an opportunity for me to grow, to see the other side of the pain, the other side of darkness, which is the light. But you get to choose. You can be the blank canvas where you get to decide that you want to live a life of meaning. And we've talked about Viktor Frankl before, and ultimately, life is asking us that question all the time. And what I say is, even if you don't know, even if it's not kind of given to you, you get to decide that. You get to choose your own meaning. Not from what people told you, not from what is expected of you. You get to choose. You get to decide. So if we go through those questions again, if you wish, you can just like next time just kind of put on a faster tempo if need be, or stop at times to really contemplate, but really think about going, I get to choose to change my perception. I get to choose to think differently. I don't have to be wired in from the one lens. There are so many different lenses and perceptions, but once I go through all these different perceptions, how can I possibly hold the original lens intact in the exact same way? You can't, because we've reframed it and asked and considered. I haven't told you anything. Notice that? I haven't told you that this is that, this is this, you've got to do this. Of course you're good enough, of course you have. I mean, I believe it. But you've got to ask yourself these questions, which will then come up with your own answers, your own meanings and attachments. So I hope you got value from this episode. Please go to josephclough.info/review to be able to rate the podcast, the app. And that just means we can support more people who really, really need it. This has been episode 817, where I'm kind of producing like 3 episodes every single week for those who really need it, all for free. So I just hope you're getting value from these. Just even sometimes one question may just trigger all these other things along the way. Sometimes like, wow, the sum of my people in my life, they're actually all bad and negative. Maybe we'll make some changes. Or maybe I've been comparing myself to others where I'm not comparing to who I was last week. All of those things. You get to decide this. So thank you ever so much, and I look forward to speaking to you on a future episode. Many thanks and goodbye.